Looking to network and hitting the pavement? We've done the work to help you get ready for your next job. We've got the experts and the latest tips, and we got you. This is Job Hunt New York.
Hi, and welcome to Job Hunt New York. I'm Carrie Barrett. For the next half an hour, we're going to try and help you not only find and capture a fantastic job, but also discover the ways to advance and find satisfaction in your career as well. That's key. Joining us now is executive coach and wellness and burnout management expert, Neelu Kaur. Neelu, it is fantastic to have you with us. We have so much to talk about. Who hasn't experienced burnout, especially over the past couple of years? Let me start by asking you, how do you manage burnout in that sort of job hunt phase? Because it can get super frustrating.
Yeah, I think like if you are interviewing or you're looking for a position and you feel like if you have an inclination that you're going to get burned out, chances are, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the chances are you will. And the reason is because in the current economic state that we're in, there's so many people getting laid off. You know, organizations are saying, okay, 4 people left, we're only going to hire 1 person. So that 1 person that's coming in is essentially responsible for 4 people's jobs. So if you think about burnout, it's inevitable. So the onus is on us as we decide if we're going to take that type of role. But then also once we're in the role, what can we do to manage some of those things that are going to be, forefront for us?
Yeah, rearing their ugly heads on a daily and perhaps minute-by-minute basis. I'm going to jump into that in just a second, but I want to ask you, you said the onus is on us. How do you know, as you're looking for this job, A, whether it is going to be the right fit and whether it will take you down that path of burnout?
I think oftentimes we know the answer to questions and we just don't listen to ourselves. So I use this concept. It comes from conscious leadership. It's called the whole body yes, which basically means your head, heart, and gut are aligned. So if you are in the interview process and there's something like an inclination that there's something not right, or I need to ask more questions, like go with your gut instinct. If you really feel like this is not a good fit for you, there are plenty of jobs out there and there's plenty of opportunities for you. I just encourage everyone not to have a limitation mindset, to have an abundant mindset, no matter what you're hearing in the news, because your head, heart, and gut need to be aligned, because essentially this is your life, and work is where you spend the most part of your time, and so you want to make sure you're going into it in a good mindset.
Yeah, that you're jumping in, and if it's not a heck yes, it's a heck no.
Exactly.
Phrase a little bit.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Let me ask you about that sort of intuition or that guidance, because when we are looking for a job, there could be a lot on the table in terms of, how high are the stakes, how precarious is my financial situation, and sometimes we just jump at something because we're thinking with our emotions. But you're sort of advocating for that. How do you get in touch with that? Like that inner guidance that you talked about, and listen to it, because most of us are just programmed to not even realize it's there.
If we have, and I know there's people out there, and I've been in that situation myself, where I take positions, or I'll take a project, or I'll take on a client because it's financially like something I need to do, even though internally I know it's not the best fit. So the way I talk to myself, the narrative, the internal dialogue is like, hey, this is a temporary situation and it's going to get better. So I go in it knowing that this is not sort of a long-term approach. So if you're in a financial bind, I'm not here to tell you as an executive coach not to take the job. You obviously have to look at your fixed costs, your family, your responsibilities. But what I'm saying is you ultimately are your own guide. You are your own teacher, and And the way to tap into that is, if there's an inkling of doubt, don't dismiss it. Actually, do some due diligence. Try to find people who, even if you can't find people in that organization, maybe you can find people with similar types of roles. I mean, LinkedIn in itself, you can find so many people to talk to. So if you have an inkling of a doubt that this might not be a good culture fit for you, absolutely listen to your voice, your inner guidance system.
You mentioned LinkedIn. I want to just sort of piggyback on that for a second. Are there other good, we hear of Glassdoor, I think it's called, and some other sort of review type places of, employers, is Glassdoor a good resource? Like, where should people be looking aside from LinkedIn to get additional information?
Yeah, I have mixed reviews on that. Like, I've heard people use Glassdoor, and I've actually looked at it for inside information, but I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure it's totally accurate. I think
Okay.
the most accurate place you can go is another human being and having a conversation. Just ask someone for a quick 10-minute conversation, 15-minute conversation, and have your questions prepared beforehand. So you're going in and you have an agenda and you can ask specific questions that will answer your concerns that you have about the job, the organization, the type of role it is.
Yeah, the culture, what kind of fit it is. I want to ask you about sort of that. Let's say you're in the thick of the job search process, and listen, I don't even want to say the word, but we're rates, the recession, the economy, the great readjustment, or heck, I can't remember what it was called, the reassignment or reassessment.
Yes.
Anyway, you get what I'm going.
Yes, there's a lot of yes.
Downsizing, layoffs, people that voluntarily left the workforce. Like, what are some of the things, I guess, that you need to consider with all those different issues that are percolating, and many of them are still sort of novel for a lot of us as you look for a great job or as you go into the interview?
I think there's things to consider. Like, you have to look at your own personal situation. And if you're in a situation where you need to take a job right away, then of course you're going to look and see what you can take immediately, but know that there's a longer term, like something better on the horizon. So I think, short term, midterm, and long term thinking are probably the best strategies to have, because in the time that we're in now, it's very rare that someone stays in their job for more than a handful of years. I mean, even if they're in a job, especially in certain industries like tech, like most people in tech, they're in their jobs 2 to 3 years and then they're out and they're doing something else in a different organization, probably in the same industry. But nonetheless, I think if you think of it as like short term, midterm, and long term, it's going to help you like mentally settle into whatever decision you're making in that moment.
That makes perfect sense. Let me ask you a question about productivity and this hybrid work environment, or this virtual work environment that we found ourselves over the past couple of years. If somebody, they don't want to commute anymore and get up at, 4 a.m, especially battling New York traffic. Is that remote opportunity? Is that a good solution or mediation for burnout? And is that something that's still negotiable in the process of job hunting?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are different things to consider, right? Like, you will decrease your commute, but then what will happen is people will schedule meetings back to back with no time to process information. So your brain is like constantly context switching, which is a recipe for disaster, which is what is going to cause you burnout. So the thing is, if you are in a remote situation, perhaps you can go into the office a couple of days a week so you can maximize that time in person. And then when you're home, you're not sort of like hustling and bustling to get through everything, to go meeting after meeting. Because I know many of my clients, their burnout is specifically around context switching and not having the ability to synthesize and process information. And I think sometimes when we had a commute, we had more time to process information. Yeah. Assuming you're in New York and you're taking public transportation, obviously if you're driving, you are not processing information, hopefully. Like, hopefully you're focused on the road. But what I'm saying is, if you're on the subway or you're taking the ferry, you're probably listening to a podcast, you're probably taking some downtime. And I think we have actually gotten further and further away from downtime as we've been in this hybrid or even virtual, 100% virtual model that we've been in for quite some time now.
You make a really good point, and I haven't ever thought of it in those terms, but you're right. That commute in and the commute time was sort of like your gear up time and your wind down time. And now we're just thrust from the chaos of home to the chaos of work and right back into the chaos of home again. It brings up some interesting things, and you're right. We all talk about Zoom fatigue and where that's brought us. Are there trends that you see taking place in, recruitment or growth industries that maybe people should be considering, even if they don't feel like they have the perfect skill set for them?
Yeah. So if you think about, there's certain organizations that are now saying, okay, you can be here, 3 days a week and you work from home 2 days a week. So you have to see, like, if you have small children at home and that's not doable, right? It's like you are you are the master of your own life, right? So you have to look at your situations and decide, is this a right fit for me? If you prefer to be in the office, go in the office. I have many clients at Google, at Meta, and there is a mandate for, coming in 3 days a week, but they have flexibility as to the days that they can come in. So it is on you to determine like what is the best recipe or formula for yourself.
That makes sense as well. I mean, I know it's easy to say, but boy, it's hard to do sometimes when you're in the thick of everything. Let's quickly talk about managing time. You talked about, going from, you had a term, but going from sort of one task to the next and not giving yourself time to process. One of the things that I hear, we have just about a minute 30 left. So one of the things that I hear is that employers, some of them anyway, have become less aware of the boundaries around work time and, home time, making calls at 10 p.m., sending emails out at 11 and expecting an answer. How can you gauge whether that's how that company operates when you're going through the interview process? What are some things you should be looking for?
I mean, one of the things that you can look for is if you send a message, like let's say you had an interview and you send a message and you want to look at the timestamp, see when that person responded. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I work across across time zones. I work in different parts of the world. So I send emails sometimes at 1 a.m. because I'm working with a client that's based in India, right? So you have to see, but if you're New York based and you're working for a New York-based company, look at the timestamp of when someone responds to your email. If it's 11 p.m., chances are that's probably what the culture is like, because most organizations have caught on to the fact that if senior executives are answering emails at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., that is a subliminal message, a subconscious message that you also have to respond. So that is a first indication that perhaps it's not the right culture for you.
That is a fantastic tip. Neelu, if you can stay right there, I'd love to continue this conversation after these helpful tips. Once again, we have Neelu Kaur joining us. She's an executive coach and a wellness and burnout management expert. And it is your expertise on that particular topic that we are going to be exploring. You got the job. You landed the great job based on all your fantastic tips. And now you're figuring out how it is that you're going to advance or not within the organization that you accepted employment from. What is the relationship between, let's say, self-advocacy and burnout, or maybe vitality is a more positive way of framing that?
Yes. I'm glad you asked, because I just wrote a book on it. So my book is called, it's called Be Your Own Cheerleader, and it's through the lens of, so the book is through the lens of Asian and South Asian women in the workplace, but it's for anyone that struggles with self-advocacy. So what I say is, if you don't feel like you have the energy or you're burned out, you are not going to be able to self-advocate and self-promote. So you want to first work on vitality, getting your vitality to a place where you feel confident to speak up, to interject when you're silenced, which happens a lot for women in the workplace. And so, yes, burnout to me, it's not a linear path, but it is a non-linear path where we want to make sure you feel vital and feel vitality in order to feel self-confident to self-advocate.
So that leads me into my next question, which is, are there tips that you have, things we should be doing before the problem rears its ugly head to sort of manage that burnout?
Yes, there are so many things you can do. One of the things is you might notice on your calendar that you are in meetings just for the sake of being in meetings. And this is very it's not rocket science. But on Sunday night or Monday early morning, whenever you get yourself ready for the week, you want to look through and do a calendar sweep. Take yourself out of things that just are not the best use of your time. I've noticed that some of my clients are in meetings back to back where they're on like 12 Zoom meetings a day. And that is not a productive day because you're spending so much time in meetings and no time processing, no time actually doing any work. So the first thing is just let's do a calendar sweep. Look through your calendar, take yourself off of things that you do not need to be on.
And that is huge. I, in fact, just did that today. I had myself booked for an hour and I realized we only need a half an hour. I'm going to set the expectation up front that this is going to be a 30-minute call versus a 60-minute one. And it made a world of difference in my energy and my ability to focus, and certainly your downtime as well. Is there anything else that people should be thinking about or being proactive about when it comes to that?
Yeah. So if you manage your own calendar or if your assistant manages your calendar, whatever the case is, you want to make sure you add buffers between meetings because, again, the context switching. If you are just going from one meeting to another, your brain is not able to process and synthesize data. So you want to make sure you schedule at least 10 to 15 minutes between meetings. 30 would be ideal. Perhaps you can even eat. Like some people forget to eat. They forget to go to the bathroom. Like you want to do these things that you need to do in order to be productive during the day. And sometimes we just forget because we're so busy.
Yeah. I feel like every time you make a point, I'm saying a great point, but they are great points. I've eaten today.
Exactly. And I ate like a small snack. And so here we are talking about not, vitality. And we both have not eaten like a full meal, which is problematic.
We need to practice what we preach.
Yes,
hopefully my brain can maintain functionality through the course of the show. Are there certain red flags that that when somebody sees this happening or they feel this certain kind of way for this period of time, that this, no matter what you do to manage and remediate burnout, this organization is no longer a good fit? What are those signs and what do you do?
Yeah, I think from my perspective and from the people that I work with, if you constantly feel silenced, if you feel like your voice is not being heard, you can work with someone to help you, but ultimately it's a cultural fit too, right? So you notice that continuously, despite which team you're working in, despite what manager you have, if you're constantly being silenced, that's probably an indication that this company is not a good cultural fit. And there's a lot of organizations like that, unfortunately, where women are silenced or the loudest voice in the room gets heard. So that leaves out space for extreme introverts, for like neurodivergent folks, like you have to see for yourself if it's a culture fit. And one of the things that I say is like, if you constantly feel like you can't get your opinion or your voice heard, that's a big red flag for me.
Is there something you can do about that? I'm sort of making this maybe a more complex issue than it needs to be, but you mentioned, I want to advance here. I don't know how to advocate for myself. I'm being silenced. When you feel that way, how do you broach the subject with, say, leadership or executives? Like, what is the right way so that you can continue if there's a chance and you want to be there?
Yeah, I think there's like a two-step approach. Like you don't want to be the squeaky wheel that's always, complaining, right? We never want to be the complainers. We want to be the executors, the doers. But there's a strategy that I talk about in my book where it's called interruption shield. So these are words or phrases that we just get comfortable using and you can get back into a conversation. So let's say you're in a meeting and you're silenced. An interruption shield might be, if I may interject here, can we circle back to my point XYZ, right? So these are words or phrases that we want to use and practice flexing. And let's say you've done this. Let's say you've done this for 6 months or 8 months and you've used these interruption shields. You've tried to get your voice heard and it's still not working. Then yes, you may want to escalate it to your manager and say, this is what I'm noticing, and actually come with some facts and figures. Like in the last 3 meetings, this happened. You don't want to just use over generalizations like, oh, this always happens. Like, no, if it happened 3 times, bring up the 3 times, right? Like come with data, come with facts, not fiction, and use your interruption shields for a handful of time for a few months. And if that's still not working, then I say, then you want to escalate it and speak to the higher ups in your organization.
Yeah, so keep a couple of phrases or sort of skill sets in your toolbox or your knapsack that you can reach in and pull out on a moment's notice and sort of deploy and see if it makes a change.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the self-advocacy sort of skills in general. And you mentioned women, you mentioned underrepresented voices, minorities. Without painting, with a very broad brush, those groups or demographics, right? We're in them, tend to have that problem a little bit more frequently, and for
Right.
whatever reason. What are some of those skills that people should understand and be able to execute or deploy? Like, what do they need to know?
Right. I like to think of it as like a speedometer on your car, right? You have these dials. So you have a
Yeah.
we dial and an I dial. So what happens is for people that come from collective cultures, or if you're extremely introverted, you don't want to stick out in any way, you want to navigate these dials. So for example, if you're in a brainstorm conversation with your team, you want to use more we based words. So our outcomes, shared deliverables, right? Like these are we based words. But then when you're in a performance review conversation or you're talking about things that you've done, you need to talk openly about your credentials. And it's not tooting your own horn. It's literally turning up the I dial where it's like, I can be a part of this team, but I also have to be apart from this team in order to stick out. So I say once you bring it to your conscious awareness that there's this dial and you need to play with this we versus I dial, it allows you to speak about yourself and your accomplishments in a more confident manner.
How do you approach, let's say you've done all of these things and this is not where you are putting down roots. You know it is time to go. You made a bad choice for whatever reason, desperation, or you didn't do the homework. What are some takeaways people should, scrape from that last experience and use to make a better decision when they're looking to advance elsewhere next time around?
I mean, there's three questions I always ask myself is what went well, what could have been better, and what do I do going forward? So it's like the plus, minus, and the delta. So what went really well? Even if it was a bad experience, I'm sure you had some good things that you could learn from that experience. Yeah. What do you want to do differently? So yes, I learned this position or this role or this industry is not good for me. So going forward, that's the delta. I'm going to go to healthcare. I'm going to go to tech. I'm going to go to something different. So I think those three questions, if you could ask yourself that after the job that you leave, the plus, minus, and the delta, and journal it. So you always have, evidence of it. You don't forget about it. And then you make your decisions accordingly.
I have to ask you, there's so much more to burnout management and perhaps mediation than I realized. What do you focus on? There's so much that you, I'm sure, talk to your clients about. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I come into organizations and I have workshops, and it usually falls in the leadership development or the mental health and well-being space. And in the last 5 years that I've been working on my book, it's been really focused on self-advocacy, but I come in through the mental health and well-being perspective because I truly feel like, again, if you don't feel vital, if you don't feel well, mentally well, you're not going to be able to be your own cheerleader. So I come in the group workshops, and then typically that's how I get my individual coaching clients is people from those workshops will work with me. And I work across industries, across the globe. I have clients all over the world. And so talking about balancing time, it's a challenge for me as well.
Yeah. One last question before we wrap up. Do you find that as a whole, not just employees, but employers are becoming more aware of, the role a job or career can have in mental health and the problem with burnout? It's not hopefully viewed as you're just being, somebody whiny or a sore loser. Like, is there a more cognizant response to these issues now?
I really think it depends on the organization. And I think this term has been thrown around a lot. It's like, bring your full self to work. Well, if you're a full self, a full human being, you will have stuff that's upsetting you. You will have issues going on. And if you don't feel safe to talk about it, that's probably an indication that, not saying you need to blast it to your team or whatever, but I do think this concept of bring your full self to work has definitely escalated during the pandemic, where people have insight into like my background. You can maybe make some guesses as to like where I live in New York, or you might, what I mean? Like you can see into my home. And so you can make you could make some comments that could be like microaggressions. Or you can say, okay, we're all in each other's homes. We have to bring our full selves to work. And so I do think there's an increased initiative to allow people a safe space, a psychologically safe place to really bring their full selves to work.
Neelu, you are fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for another half an hour. Thank you so
Thank you so much
for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your time with us today.
Thank you.
And look at that. You thought finding a job and then being happy in your career was challenging enough. Now you realize you have to learn and manage your burnout or potential burnout anyway. All of that can be incredibly challenging. We hope we've helped just a little bit anyway in putting you on the path to career success. Thank you for watching Job Hunt New York. I'm Carrie Barrett, and I'll see you next time.